This is Connected, sharing our stories and bringing colleagues together across NSS.
Hello listeners, and a warm welcome to a special episode of NSS Connected. Connected is your podcast showcasing the work of our colleagues within National Services Scotland and the achievements of our wider NHS Scotland family. I'm your host, Richard Pigeon, and in this episode we'll be focusing on an area of public health that touches the lives of families and communities across Scotland, our national screening programmes. And who better to talk to than Gareth Brown, who joined NSS last year as Director of Screening and who leads the National Screening Oversight Group. But before we catch up with Gareth, I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleague Lynn Edwardson, who's making her debut as a co-host on Connected. Lynn, it's fantastic to have you on board, and I wonder if you could share a little bit of your own background. I know you've joined NSS fairly recently, but you've got great experience working at fellow health boards.
Yes, hi Richard, it's great to be here today. I actually started my career in oil and gas a long time ago and worked at British Gas for 8 years in the fuel poverty area and worked on schemes all across the UK. And from that, I really wanted to come into the public sector, so joined the Scottish Ambulance Service through that, and has been working there for the past 5 years as a communications business partner in all types of activities.
In future, we'll look forward to hearing more about your work at the Scottish Ambulance Service. I know they do a lot of really exciting work there as well, but and that's what it's all about. Connected's all about bringing colleagues together from across NSS and the wider NHS Scotland family. So really appreciate you sharing that, Lynn. Now this episode, it's a screening special, which reflects the huge public health significance of these national programmes. So what can we look forward to from Gareth?
Well, Richard, Gareth really covers a lot of ground, which I'm sure our listeners will enjoy. He discusses the successes and challenges within screening and the exciting opportunities that digital transformation can bring. He also shares his appreciation of the expertise within his team and the commitment and skills of the wider NHS screening service community. Gareth also talks about his pet dog, who makes a surprise guest appearance and reveals an unlikely link with Coldplay. So with that tease, let's go straight to Richard interviewing Gareth Brown, Director of Screening.
So few areas of our work within NHS National Service Scotland touch the lives of more people than our involvement with screening programmes on a national level. These are programmes which impact upon families up and down Scotland and all ages. Delighted to be joined today by Gareth Brown, who has the considerable responsibility of overseeing our role within his work for the National Screening Oversight Forum. Gareth, great to have you here today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, lovely to be here.
Gareth, I hope that was a fair description of the work of the national screening teams in terms of the scale and scope of what they do.
I think so. I mean, I think and this is at least part of the reason why I suppose I'm here, is screening is really quite a complex thing. Anybody who's working in screening will know that. We've got these programs that all run in slightly different ways. As you said in the intro, they deal with huge numbers of people, hundreds of thousands of people sometimes. So they're working at a huge scale, and they have national components and local components, and that varies from programme to programme. So they're really, really complicated things involving other people in NSS, people in NHS boards, third sector, obviously participants themselves. So it's a really complicated landscape. And I think what we are here to do, the oversight team, is to try and help the screening programmes be as good as they possibly can be. And that's not to say that they're not good at the moment. I mean, certainly I'm not here because screening is in crisis or the screening programmes are failing. Screening for most people most of the time works absolutely fine, and we're detecting and preventing, serious diseases and improving people's lives. But there's no doubt that with this level of complexity, there's a possibility of things falling between the cracks, or there's absolutely opportunities for us to do things better. And that's why we're here, really. That's why we've been created. We've been created to try and, at a national level, bring a bit of oversight, a bit of sort of looking right across the piece rather than looking in individual programmes and seeing what we can do better over the long term.
And as you mentioned there, that kind of theme, that kind of national overarching view that you get, sounds like it'll bring a lot of benefits as well, Gareth, in terms of, as you say, identifying the opportunities to keep improving on an excellent service, but also identifying where there are things that could be improved or changed.
I hope so. I mean, if you think about the screening programmes, they've all started at different times. You know, breast screening's been around for decades, I think. Right up to AAA screening, the abdominal aortic aneurysm screening, which started more recently. So they've sort of commenced in different eras, if you will, and even the public has different views, different levels of knowledge about them. And everybody who's working in each of the programmes is no doubt doing great work at delivering the programme, dealing with participants, making sure people are screened. And I think what we can try and do is look across all of the programmes at the one time and see where there's commonalities, see where there's things that we can do better that helps all the programmes, or see where one programme can learn from another programme. And this, I suppose, there's a few big themes for us. We've been thinking about what we're going to try and focus on over the next few years, and there's a few big themes in there. There's something about digital, so all of the programmes have IT systems, all individual IT systems, all heinously complex, involving how you call or don't call people for screening, and when is somebody eligible or not eligible, and what happens if they move GP practice, and all this sort of complexity. And I think there's opportunities that we have to improve the digital capability that underpins screening programs, so we have a more modern, a more flexible technology that allows people who are eligible for screening to have more of a say in what they're doing, to maybe engage with their screening journey more than happens at the moment. I mean, at the moment, if you're, for example, cervical screening, you get one of these old sort of payslip mailers through the post telling you to make an appointment. And in the future, it'd be great if somebody can engage maybe with directly through an app or through a website, choose when they want to be screened after they're eligible, choose where, if they work in another part of the country to where they live, but they have to go to where they live, and just giving people a bit more ownership and removing any barriers that might just make it less likely that somebody's going to turn up for screening, making it as easy as possible for people to be screened. And that's the sort of thing that we can perhaps do better at a system level rather than individual programs are able to do by themselves. And I know this is not to say everybody's been thinking about this. This is not new thinking. People know that there's barriers and making it things that make it harder for people to be screened. But everybody's very busy and sort of doing the job and trying to deliver screening, and we might just have the capacity to do some of that nice to have stuff rather than must do stuff, and do it at a system level, do it once for Scotland rather than doing it individually in every programme.
No, that sounds really exciting as well, Gareth, and I absolutely get that piece there about that almost making it a two-way process, almost that journey between the person being screened and those who are delivering that screening programme. I guess perhaps at the moment it can seem clinical in that sense, in terms of not having that kind of personal connection, which I think you're right would perhaps allow people to feel more engaged and feel more comfortable being part of that screening process. And I guess, Gareth, throughout the last 12 months, COVID has, of course, impacted everything. But you mentioned the other kind of how digital can play a really key part potentially in your reimagining and re-engineering of the screening landscape in Scotland. Have you been encouraged by what you've seen our digital and security teams help achieve at such pace to think what that level of capability and pace and drive could support the work that you and your team have planned?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Screening Oversight Team is quite a small team. We've got 4 people in the core team, but one of those people is a digital and change lead, and that's David Proud, who also works in DAS. And I think right from the outset, even before I was involved, there was a recognition that the digital capability and the capabilities of DAS and NSS have a real potential to create new capacity to enable different ways of working. And that's really why David's in the team. And absolutely, the experience of COVID, I think, has shown what's possible when you must do something. I think everybody knows and has known for a long time, technology can really deliver solutions. But the real challenge around technology, I've said this to people in the past, is the problem with technology and IT is it's really important, but it's also quite complicated and it can be quite boring. That's the real challenge with IT. And so getting people to understand the real potential that thinking seriously about your digital capability talking to people about, well, this is about you engaging with your own sort of participants in a more interactive way, rather than you send something out and there's a sort of a passive engagement. Digital capability allows you to do that in a more interactive, a more engaging sort of way. But we have to do the sort of hard, technical, boring stuff to provide that. So you have to take people on that journey with you. You have to make people understand why you're doing it. But it's not just about sort of computers and digital. We're looking at how we use data in different ways. So we know one of the real issues around screening, and this is a long-standing issue that all the programmes wrestle with, is the challenge in uptake and inequalities. People are more likely to take up the offer of screening if they come from certain backgrounds. And we really want to try and increase uptake in those who are less likely to take it, and look at what the barriers are. And one of the keys to being able to do that is to understand what are the different populations, or where are they, or what are the barriers. So already we've been looking at how we, with colleagues in Public Health Scotland and with colleagues in DAS, we're looking at how do we develop ways of understanding our data and sharing our data with other partners across the system. So we've been doing this work on a sort of proof of concept of a data dashboard that shows, for screening programmes, what is the uptake down to different localities. And colleagues in health and social care partnerships have been really interested in that, because they have a responsibility to tackle inequalities as well. And we're giving them, through this new proof of concept, data that they haven't previously had in ways they haven't previously had it before. And that gives them something new to use when they're thinking about, well, we're engaging with this population in this area, let's also talk to them about screening. So I think we're trying to look at those with DAS and with colleagues in Public Health Scotland, look at the assets we've got, which is great data, national systems, but try and find ways to connect it to other data sets or connect it to other parts of the public sector so they can use it in new ways to help us tackle that inequalities problem. And so it's about reaching out sort of beyond their usual boundaries and trying to find different ways of using the things we've got, which are great, but using them in different ways.
No, that's really interesting as well, Gareth. And I get that the scale and the scope of screening historically has meant you've always involved many partners. It's always been a collaborative process, but it sounds like you're almost being bolder there and trying to find new ways to link up data. And I like the idea that then at a very local level, presumably screening teams could think about how they engage that particular community or that particular segment of the community as part of that wider tackling of health inequalities that we're all committed to. So it's hugely important and interesting work you're involved in, Gareth, obviously. And what was your own kind of personal career journey that's taken you to this post and this role? I believe, like myself, you started your professional career in the previous millennium, Gareth.
I wouldn't want to reveal how aged I actually am, but yeah, no, I only joined NSS to take up this role in September last year. Prior to that, I worked in government, Scottish Government. I started in Scottish Government in 1999, and immediately prior to coming here, I was obviously involved in all the COVID work. So I'd had about 10 years working in health protection in Scottish Government, dealing with, as well as screening, dealing with infectious diseases and vaccination and exciting things like Ebola outbreaks and TB outbreaks and organ donation. So really interesting stuff, dealing with things that actually make a difference to people's lives. And then I'd gone away from health. I'd chosen to do something different. I was working in housing, and then COVID came along, and I got the hand of God on my collar, pulled me back to health to help in the crisis. And last year, I spent 6 months first working in Chief Medical Officer's office, and then working in the DG Health office, just trying to help colleagues deal with COVID. And it was a remarkable time, one of these sort of once in a generation, if even that, sort of events. Really impressive to see how people responded, but also the sacrifices people made to respond and to deal with COVID crisis. And then I kind of moved into the screening job in the second half of the year, and I saw some of that there as well. I came in just as the pause, so we paused most of the screening programmes as a result of COVID, and I came in just as the oversight team, as it was then, was supporting the wider system, colleagues in NSD and the boards to recover from that screening pause. And it was really impressive to see. We made that recovery pretty quickly. We paused for about 3 or 4 months, but the sort of commitment and the dedication that people across the screening programmes showed in terms of getting things up and running again as quickly as possible, recognising undoubtedly the health impact that has arisen as a result of that pause. People not being screened for 3 or 4 months, that will have a long-term legacy that we probably won't fully understand for years. But the amount of effort and the commitment that people put into recovering those programmes towards, I think by October last year, we had them all up and running again. And then not only that, but then continuing to deliver the programmes during that second peak over the course of the winter we've just had, which was arguably worse than the first peak last year, was amazing. And people should be really proud. Everybody who's worked across the screening programme should be really proud in what they've achieved in terms of keeping the show on the road during such remarkably trying times. And now we're coming out of that, and hopefully we will be able to help the screening programmes learn the lessons from that. We've started having conversations about what did COVID allow us and force us to do differently, and maybe we've broken down some barriers, and what can we learn from that going forward. And we're starting to have those, as I say, those conversations now with the programme boards, and hopefully if the trajectory continues in the way it's looking, that COVID will potentially become something that's more of a business as usual thing, like a flu, an annual flu cycle, we might be able to start getting into that space of dealing with thinking about doing things differently in the future, rather than just managing and recovering from the COVID pause, which has been the story for the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think that's one of the great unsung efforts, if you like, Gareth, that restarting, the rebooting of those programmes, because of the scale of them, the numbers that are involved, the hundreds of thousands that are impacted, that's to halt something like that and then safely and effectively restart it and immediately build in some of the initial learnings you've had is a really remarkable effort. And I think all the screening, everyone involved in screening in whatever way should be very proud of what they've done. That leads me on a little bit, Gareth, to something we're talking about as an organisation, that sometimes that we do the business as usual. Some of our areas are more operational than others, and we really believe that actually connecting to our purpose, our ultimate purpose, and you've talked about it, making a positive difference to the public health outcomes of large numbers of people, is really important. And is that something that throughout the challenges of COVID has sustained you at times, Gareth, just knowing that through your work, through the work that you lead and support, there is a huge measurable difference to the health of a nation?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say all through my career, it's been something that really has kept me interested and driven me. Colleagues might not know, but when you work in government, it can be quite abstract sometimes. You can make a bit of legislation, or you can spend your time writing press lines for press inquiries or briefings for ministers, and that doesn't necessarily make the world a better place. But when you do things like you invest in. One of the things I was involved in is trying to tackle Scotland's Hepatitis C problem, and over about 10 years we could actually demonstrate the impact we had in terms of people who were cured, who wouldn't otherwise be cured, or people who weren't infected, who might otherwise have been infected, and you can count in sort of human lives the impact you've had, and that's very rewarding. And I think coming into screening, and the conscious choice I made to come out of government for a few years and come into screening, was about trying to get into a bit more of that operational space, that space that's closer to the real world. Not that government's detached from the real world, would never say such a thing, but closer to the real world and closer to what's happening on the ground, and seeing how, and it's not just participants, but seeing how people who are working in screening, who dedicate many years of their working life to supporting screening programmes, the sorts of things they're wrestling with, the sorts of things that annoy them, and what can we do to make their life a bit easier and a bit better. And even, already we've been looking at how in the 6 months that I've been in, we found a bit of additional investment to put into some of the backlogs and developing the IT systems that hopefully will make people's lives a bit better. These sort of niggling annoyances that never seem to get solved. I think we can try and find ways and develop systems to allow those sorts of things to be improved more readily than they have been in the past. And if nothing else, hopefully we'll bring a bit of visibility and a bit of prioritisation to what, in my view, is one of the most important public health programmes or set of programmes that we run, but which often, because it largely works well most of the time, sort of rumbles along in the background and doesn't have the profile it really should have. And if I can do anything on behalf of people working in screening, it will be trying to raise the profile of screening as, look, this is really important stuff that goes on. A lot of people work very hard in it, and we have a really big and measurable impact on the health of the people of Scotland, and we should maybe just be better at recognising and respecting that. And I do know government and politicians in government recognise the importance of screening programmes, but I think maybe it goes a bit under the radar in the wider NHS and in the wider sort of general public in Scotland. Everybody knows screening is one of those things you do, but I think we can get better at shouting about how great it is and how good we are in Scotland, and how much better we will be in the future by the sort of continuous improvement and the working with people on the ground will allow us to be.
No, absolutely. And it's something that strikes me as well. I was interested to hear what you said, Gareth, about deliberately seeking out that different perspective, that, moving from government to operational. But I think one of the very best things about National Services Scotland is the scope, the breadth of what we deliver, and actually seeing how clinical outcomes are supported by all the work that goes in procurement and in 100 different areas, every single area, how it all comes together. I think that's a really big piece, an important piece as well, that virtually nothing that's achieved by any part of our organisation would be possible without the support of many other parts of the organisation as well. But we've talked about digital and data a bit, Gareth. I'm a geek myself. I like things like that. I like technology. I like data. I'm just about young enough to be able to cope with that kind of stuff. Are you quite that way inclined yourself, Gareth? Obviously, a lot of the screening results are data.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm interested in data. I suppose I would describe myself as being interested in the product more than the machinery. So I understand a bit about sort of IT geekery. I understand enough to be able to pretend I know what I'm talking about when I'm having a conversation with somebody who knows a lot more than me. I understand enough not to embarrass myself, but I think all these things, the sort of data mechanics, the IT geekery, the machinery, it's only valuable if it actually makes a difference. If it might be fascinating in and of itself to change a bit of code here or there, or to find a different data set, but if it's not actually got a practical application, if it's not going to make somebody's life easier or better, then I'm probably less interested in it. I see these our work in data, our work in digital, likewise our work on quality, trying to improve quality across the system. Julie Anderson, who works in the oversight function, is leading our work on sort of developing a quality management framework. That's very technocratic. And Julie is the brains of the operation. I mean, I defer to her much greater knowledge, but for me, the value there is not in terms of the technocratic approach to quality methodologies. It's actually the outcome is better, consistent programs, and that translates into better outcomes for people. That's really what I'm focused on. But you need to have people who know the machinery, the big brains, who can do that stuff correctly to get you to that output. So I'm very keen that we invest in that sort of expertise and that capability. In the same way as Tasman, who's our clinical advisor, public health clinical advisor in the oversight function, brings that same sort of technical expertise from the sort of professional clinical public health background. And I stand on all three of their shoulders, their expertise, David, Julie and Tasman, in terms of the expertise they bring. And sometimes my job is just to sort of facilitate their expertise being delivered into the most useful place. But all we're doing has to be focused on, and indeed our work plan for the year sets up, participants as the heart of everything we're doing. The experience of somebody coming for screening, or the experience of people who are eligible for screening, whether they take it up or not. What can we do to make it more likely that they'll take up screening, or make it more likely that they'll make an informed choice about whether to be screened or not? And once they've taken up that offer, what can we do to make it as easy as possible for them to be screened, for them to have a bit of control and ownership over that, for them to get the results they want in a timely fashion, in the way they want them, and if necessary, for them to be plugged into the sort of downstream further investigations or acute sector activities in the most timely and efficient manner. That's I think where we're coming from, is how do we deploy our expertise just to make things better for people?
No, absolutely. I guess a lot of it's a case of kind of thinking differently as well, and challenging preconceived notions as well. Gareth, I remember talking to Derek Mitchelson and Daz before about the concept of maybe years down the line, so many of us now have digital assistants, whether it's Alexa or Siri or Google, all these kind of things, whether we might move to a place where people can opt to be reminded via those kind of things. Oh, did you know you're now eligible, you've entered the age range for this screening, and actually whether there might be opportunities and things like that in the future, Gareth?
Well, absolutely. And I mean, some of the stuff we're talking about in terms of digital capability is we sort of have a long-term vision of giving people the opportunity to sort of have control of their entire screening journey. And, whether it's through a smartphone app or through, some web functionality, being reminded in the way you describe, or being able to change, as I said earlier, appointments or locations. And in the same way, I know there's work in terms of at the digital strategic level around having a sort of a single clinical record. So everybody's got a single record that all parts of the NHS sort of functionality connects into. So having us as part of that allows us to not only allow people to have a bit of ownership and can access their own information, and we can have functionality that prompts people at certain times and on their screening journey, but you can integrate with other parts of the health sector as well. So if somebody has a screen and they need to be connected up to vascular or gynecology or whatever it is, that can, the IT system can support that connectedness rather than having what at the moment I think most people would agree is a much more fragmented system or fragmented set of systems with one person represented on multiple different occasions and different systems, and you have to build other bits of machinery to connect them all up. Move into a much more modern single repository of information that different systems then can link with in a sort of a fluid, connected way, and making that participant focused or patient centered so that it's designed around what the needs of the patient are, rather than here's a process, let's work out how we can make it work for the patient. Start with what the patients or the participants want and design your functionality around that. And already I know David Proud on the digital side is looking at models around apps and what smartphone app functionality could be available in the near future to allow people to have a bit more control over their screening journey, and how does that integrate with our our digital and data systems that support the screening programs. And there's a journey to go on there. It's not something that's happening overnight, but we should be in that sort of space. I mean, if people can use a smartphone app to order from Tesco's and order a takeaway and book a taxi, we should not be too far behind being able to do that for much more important things such as getting your cervical screen or your breast screening or your bowel screening. So we're certainly working in that direction, but there's a few years to go towards that yet, I think.
It sounds like there's a lot of really good progress being made towards that ultimate destination, Gareth, and those that are supporting and enabling that end vision. You've mentioned quite a few names there already and singled out their contributions, substantial contributions. Who else is involved at the kind of National Screening Oversight group level? Is there anyone you haven't mentioned before? Or?
So the core team is, as I've said, I myself as the director of screening. As I said, I started in September. There's another 4 people who are in the core team. So Dr. Tasman Summerfield, as I said, is our clinical advisor. Tasman also works in NSD, and obviously NSD commissions and coordinates the national screening programs. David Proud, as I mentioned, is our change and digital lead. Julie Anderson is our planning, performance and quality lead. And then the other person I haven't mentioned so far is Claire Winstanley, who's our support officer, who keeps us all right and makes sure we're all in the right place at the right time and knowing what we should be knowing, and is probably the most important person in the team. We've had other people helping us along the way. So since the creation of the site function, we've had some support from PGMS and sort of service design colleagues over the last 6 to 12 months. So Edmund Rooney and Sarah Adams have both taken forward or helped us take forward work around reviewing governance and developing materials to communicate and help colleagues across the wider system understand sort of governance routes and accountabilities and who's responsible for what. And that's one of these long-standing issues in such complex problems, knowing who's responsible for what and where to escalate things to. And so that's one of the first things we were trying to solve. And they've been helped in that by Sebastian Lawson Thorpe. So we've had help from other parts of NSS. We'll have other people joining the team, I'm sure, in the future. We'll shortly be joined by a public health trainee on secondment, on sort of trainee placement for 12 months. That's the dog barking in the background. So yeah, we're keen to harness the sort of expertise across the wider system. We work very closely with NSD as well. I mean, NSD obviously have had responsibility, as I've said, for commissioning and coordinating screening programs for many years. And I think one of the issues that we've had and colleagues understandably across the wider system have had since the creation of the oversight team is what do we do versus what does NSD do? And we're very much in a sort of an oversight and assurance role. So our job, this may sound a bit silly, but our job is not doing things. Our job is to ensure that other people are doing the things they should be doing. So NSD in that sort of national role, commissioning, coordinating NHS boards in terms of delivering the things that they're responsible for delivering for, DAS in terms of delivering and providing the contract support around sort of IT systems, making sure that all works together. But there is undoubtedly areas of sort of complexity and fuzziness there, particularly around the sort of, I think, the NSD role around coordination. And I know colleagues in NSD are going through a process at the moment to define what that role is and what it means and where the sort of boundaries are between ourselves and them. And sometimes there isn't an easy answer to that, or there isn't necessarily a definitive answer to that. I think we have to accept and be comfortable with sometimes a bit of fuzziness when we've got such complicated programs involving so many different people. But this will probably continue to develop over the coming year. And I think we are on a journey in the screening landscape. I think part of our job is to look at what works and what could be done differently and better in the future. So there may be other changes in 12 months or 2 years further down the line as screening continues to develop. And as we know, there's always the potential for new screening programs to come along. I know there's UK NSEs thinking about lung screening at the moment, and there may or may not be a recommendation about that we'd have to then implement if government supported it. And there's new technologies, new developments, like artificial intelligence is obviously a very current issue, and how I know colleagues are thinking at the moment and looking at how we deploy that in breast screening, for example, in the future to have different ways of delivering services. So we're not going to be static. There's always going to be change and evolution and development. And I think we just have to be comfortable with that. We have to be comfortable that the landscape can change as long as we're moving in the right direction. And we're always focusing on improving delivery of services to members of the public, then we should be comfortable with that, I think.
Excellent. And those members of the public, Gareth, they can be reassured that you've got, from everything you've said and everything that your teams have delivered over many years, Scotland's got screening programmes to be proud of, that they can put their trust in, and that we should be encouraged and fully encouraged to make sure that they get access to the screening, to take up the offers of screening that can help protect their health.
Absolutely. I'm lucky enough or unlucky enough not to be eligible for any screening programmes at the moment, depending on how you define it. But if I were, I'd be taking up every offer that comes. I used to be responsible for vaccination, and I would always say the same thing, particularly to any anti-vaccinationists. I had a conversation with, I would take every vaccine going if I could. I would take every screening programme going if I could. I think it's important that people make informed choices, and there's lots of information out there. Public Health Scotland produces information to support all screening programmes that give people a sort of an honest understanding of risks and benefits. And all screening programmes, there are risks. There are risks with being screened. There are risks with the fact that no screening test is 100% accurate. And there's risks, therefore, that you may act on a screening test and the result isn't necessarily accurate. But none of these screening programmes would be operating if the benefits don't outweigh the risks. And certainly people should be encouraged to look at the information that's out there, have conversations with healthcare providers if they're worried, but they should feel confident and comfortable that if they're taking up the offer of screening programmes are well managed in Scotland, they're well delivered, they're high quality services. As I said at the outset, the vast majority of times screening programmes work well for the people who need them, and they get them when they need to get them. And certainly people shouldn't feel anxious or discouraged about taking up the offer of screening. And certainly, as I say, a lot of effort goes into trying to provide information for people so that they can make that sort of an informed choice. And I would encourage everybody, including healthcare professionals, people employed by the NHS, as patients themselves, to go and look at that information and make sure you understand what screening can and can't do, but also that you think seriously about taking up the offer. And all we ask is people make that informed choice. That's more important to me than getting throughput up. It's giving everybody the opportunity, the chance to make an informed choice about what they want to do.
Finally, on that note, the strength of Scotland's screening programmes is entirely dependent upon the excellence and commitment of the people that make them work. What would you say to encourage those who are perhaps choosing a next career direction within their chosen skill set and area? It sounds to me like being involved in Scotland's screening programmes is a very rewarding place to be and a great career choice.
I'm probably not the best person to speak to it, since I've only worked in screening for the last 6 months, but there'll be other people much more experienced than me who can give colleagues an honest assessment. But I suppose from a principled perspective, screening is perhaps alongside vaccination is one of the things we do that has perhaps the best preventative or public health sort of health benefit. We're engaging with people who are healthy by all intents and purposes, and we're potentially identifying things, precursors for serious disease, or we're detecting things that have not been participants haven't been aware of, and we're able to do things that help them. So it can be very rewarding in that sense that you're really having a measurable impact on the health of the population. And obviously the population is made up by individuals, and you will have an impact on the health of an individual. It's one of the things I think Scotland does very well. So you'll be part of a system that I think is well regarded and well performing. And it's a system I think that is, or the programmes are are things that we're looking at and thinking about doing things differently in the future. So it's a part of the system, I think, where there will be positive changes in the future, and the more people we have engaged in that conversation who work in the system, either the people who work in screening now or who are thinking of coming into screening, the better. And certainly one of the principles we've agreed on and we've tried to communicate from the outset is the National Screening Oversight Team. We don't sit in an ivory tower and make decisions. We want to engage. We want to hear from people. We want people to tell us something's rubbish or something's great. We want people to tell us what we're doing wrong or what we're doing well. We want people to talk to us, and that gives us the intelligence. That gives us the things that we know we need to do. I mentioned earlier that we put some additional investment into tackling the backlog of developments in IT systems. That was because we heard people in programme boards talking about it. If people are in screening, they can tell us these things, and anybody coming into screening, I think will have the opportunity to shape and help us shape the future of the screening programmes going forward.
Thank you very much for that, Gareth, and that's, I think, a very revealing and insightful piece around about the role of you and your teams in that vital oversight function, and about the wider fantastic work that screening programmes do to protect public health in Scotland. Gareth, we did have one unannounced special guest during that recording there. He might have made more sense than me. Your dog barking away there, Gareth. We've got a lot of dog owners and general pet owners amongst our listenership. So could you share a bit? What kind of dog have you got?
I've got, his name is Dougal. He's a Skye Terrier. Skye Terrier is one of the most endangered ancestral breeds in Britain. The Skye Terrier is the dog so Scotty dogs and West Highland Terriers, Westies, are descended from Skye Terriers, so that's why they're classed as an ancestral breed. Greyfriars Bobby was a Skye Terrier famously, but the year that Dougal was born, he's just about 4, there were only 40 Skye Terriers registered in the UK, so there's hardly any of them going around. But they're wee characters. I mean, they're wee. He's like an old man. They're slightly misanthropic in that they're very loyal to the 2 or 3 people in the family, and they hate everybody else on principle. That might put people off buying them, but once they get to know you, they're very sort of loyal. He likes to play. I spend most of my free time wrecking my tendons by playing tug of war with him, as he incessantly demands. And he'll walk, 5 miles a day. They're a medium-sized dog, but they've got kind of short legs, a bit like a basset hound. But it's quite hardy, and he'll easily walk 5 or 6 miles a day and then want to play all evening. So I'm hoping at some point he'll grow out of that. I've been hoping that for the last 3 years, and it's not happened yet. But he's a delight most of the time. Some of the times he's not, but most of the time he's a delight. So yeah, that fills up my time when I'm not working.
Terrific. And I know Dougal's a nice name for a Skye Terrier as well. I like that. That works. And actually, on the subject of rare breeds, my wee boy's got a breed called a Lancashire Heeler. Lancashire Heelers are quite a rare. There are similarly not many of them born each year. So let's encourage listeners to take a look at some of those rare and underappreciated breeds as well, because they can be great companions. I have to say, Gareth, as well, I was digging a bit into your background and obviously a hugely impressive professional resume, but you actually sound a bit like an international man of mystery as well to me, because I believe that you have appeared on stage at Tea in the Park. You have also appeared in an award-winning, no less, short film, and possibly most impressive of all, you've snorkeled between the American and European continental plates.
Yeah, I think what that all demonstrates is I'm a very good creative writer. All that's true in one way or another. So yes, I was in a band for a while, and we did Tea in the Park and other things. I was actually at Tea in the Park the year that Coldplay became famous, and we were on the same stage as them. Sadly, we did not go in the same sort of journey of success that they went on. I gave up the glamour of rock and roll for the glamour of the civil service, and yeah, my wife and I travel a lot, so that sort of snorkeling story is there's a wee snorkeling journey you can go on in Iceland, which is technically between the North American and the Eurasian plates, and I mean it's literally a 20-minute snorkel. They drive you to this hole in the ground and you snorkel for 20 minutes, and it is fabulous, but it sounds more impressive when I write it that way than the truth of what it was. But yeah, travelling's one of the things that we love to do when we're not working.
Glad to see that perhaps the musical world's loss has been NSS's gain, Gareth. Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks so much to Gareth Brown for joining us for that interesting insight into the world of screening. NSS Connected is produced by NHS National Services Scotland. We hope you enjoyed learning more about NSS. Thanks for listening and stay safe.